So we know a lot about the way how Zeno and his crew works, and yet, this guy, he's green. And what else? Hey guys, MasakoX here. Now that might be a little bit of an over-exaggeration, but not that far off actually. In the world of Dragon Ball, there is always a need to go higher. The idea that we have on Earth is all that there is something that lasted for a very little portion of the main series, but in the grand scheme of things, it was never going to be a long-term solution. We took our first steps with the likes of Korin and his Ultra Divine Water, and not long after that, we finally got to see the guy who was, for the last third of Dragon Ball, the big guy, Kami. He was the endpoint for Goku, it seemed. He was being trained by the planet's guardian, and that is a fantastic honor. Or at least it was at the time. Granted, he knew that he was horribly insignificant, Kami, in the overall picture, but to Goku, ooh, he was the bee's knees, he was the final destination. The Dragon Ball universe is nowadays full of deities from all sorts of places, realms, and now universes. What started off quite simple in Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z got blown wide open with a cursory bit of dialogue by Beerus. At the end of his fight with Goku in Battle of Gods, he dropped the nugget of information that, oh yes, there's 12 universes out there and you're one of them, yeah. And these weren't just completely different, they were structurally identical to our one, which is Universe 7. I remember that moment and we all had a collective gasp with delight and astonishment. What could this mean for Dragon Ball? It was great and all, but now, in the here and now, it's a little muddled. Granted, 12 copies of the same thing doesn't sound all that difficult to comprehend, but all of these universes aren't carbon copies of one another. They all have their different quirks and ways of going about things which make them distinct from one another. What works in Universe 7 wouldn't necessarily work in Universe 1, 11, or even our closest version, Universe 6. There are a plethora of deities performing different tasks, and with your Kais, GODs, and angels, it seems to be a pretty simple deal on the surface. But that is until you get to the Compass Supreme Kais, the regular Kais, the Compass Kais. You even notice Super just getting rid of the Compass Supreme Kais entirely, and yeah, all of them just have one Supreme Kai. I thought that Universe 7's Supreme Kai thing was just different because, you know, Majin Buu had destroyed them. No? Apparently that was... I don't know. I did make a video detailing these ideas before the multiple universes came into play properly, but it is still needlessly awkward for a show which is otherwise quite rudimentary. It's the thing that starts to get quite murky in the long run. I mean, seriously, the Destroyers, on the other hand, have it much easier than the regular good guys, the Supreme Kais. All they have to do is basically blow stuff up which needs blowing up. Maybe it's simply because it's much easier to understand just to smash something rather than create and upkeep it, or perhaps the amount of oversight on a destroyer is much less. Destroyers also seem to be able to fraternize with the mortals much more often, or aren't as bothered than the Supreme Kais are, or people who live on the Sacred Worlds. They tend to keep an arm's length and they seem to be really abiding by it, but the Destroyers? No. I don't know why that is specifically, but my best guess from what I know is that there's a lack of supervision, and their former lives as mortals themselves kind of gives them that connection. I mean, after all, Destroyers are the highest you can go if you were born on a mortal world. I mean, just look at Toppo. Toppo has that connection. So what are we going to focus on today to try and make some sense of what can be seen as unnecessarily complex? Well, today, we are going to talk about the classic structure a little bit. Something that started this whole godly thread in the Dragon Ball universe in the first place. Today, we are going to take a look at the beings that are far closer to home. In fact, with a little bit of elbow grease and the power pole, you can actually pay some of them a visit. It's all about Guardians now, as we try to guess if they even belong in the overall god hierarchy as we know it, or whether they are just a sort of vestigial tale of the deities, and there's something that could be easily eschewed or ignored or just cut away entirely. After all, when King Yema gazed upon Kami, he deemed him insignificant, not worth his time, despite himself being almost exactly the same. He is an office worker, all he has is his desk, made from mahogany. So, what are the Guardians? Well, the name in of itself would imply that they are the first line of defense for their respective planets, the being or beings that are charged with protecting the planet at all costs. But there's a problem with that term. It's a bit of a misnomer. What we know as a Guardian in Dragon Ball doesn't really do that sort of thing. Kami, he just watches and grunts sometimes. His job is really not to interfere and instead observe. Look out to the side and go, things aren't looking so good. Hopefully the dragon team are on the case. So if you want someone more proactive, then Nail is a more accurate interpretation of an actual guardian. Perhaps maybe a more fitting title for Kami in this role would be that of an overseer. Well, if it's any consolation, Kami did do something. He is the one most likely to have restored the moon whenever something blows it up, so that's got to count for something. It also seems that the Guardians answers to a supervisor, which for Earth would be the likes of King Kai and or King Yema to a lesser extent. I suppose the most active role that Kami does is ensuring people make their way safely to the Otherworld check-in station upon their death, which is what he did with Goku. In fact, fast-tracking him there with his body intact. Also, despite their power being now dwarfed considerably by the Dragon Team, their own subjects, Kami is more powerful than anyone else on the planet, as well as being a fountain of knowledge. We also know that they are capable of sensing God Ki innately, which would make sense. I mean, since you sort of need to sense your superiors, as well as anyone else in that field, you sort of really should know it, otherwise it's going to be frighteningly embarrassing. Them being able to sense said energy was not proven by Kami, but by his successor Dende, who was able to sense Beerus's ki arriving on the planet. So, by proxy, Kami would have sensed that too. To further emphasize their role as overseers rather than guardians or protectors, they possess the abilities in order to see and sense events around the world at the same time, sort of like Santa Claus, as well as travel to the other world freely. And finally, only in special circumstances, mind you, they can protect the world in a much more direct way. The only time we really see this happen is in the 23rd World Martial Arts Tournament. And even then, Kami had to disguise himself. From what? Nobody would know who he was. Oh well, if it makes him happy, then whatever. Kami had been Guardian of Earth for a little over 300 years when we see him fuse with Piccolo. It would be safe to assume that Guardians are able to live for longer than usual, and Namekians themselves live for centuries, so Kami could live for almost 1,000 years perhaps. But regardless of their origins, they are not immortal, and it's unconfirmed whether the position actually has the ability to prolong a person's life without magic. Although Kami offering the job to Goku might infer that there is some sort of longevity increase by taking the job. It's hard to say, which is the purpose of this discussion. Why do we know so little about something so close to our Dragon Team? If longevity wasn't offered up and it wasn't on the table, then Goku being handed the job would be just a short-term solution, a band-aid, if he lived up to his standard Saiyan, then human lifespan. What's all that about? If it is like that, then Kami's usual wisdom would have just seemed to have deserted him there and then. What we do know is that the Guardian can have up to 2 assistants that help him to look after the mortal world on a more direct level. So as to not break the rule about themselves not treading on the planet. Who, according to Daizenshu 7, are from the heavenly realm itself, and not the other world like some sources may claim. And the heavenly realm essentially is the sort of place where people can go from the lookout. It's kind of confusing, but here's a bit of an explainer. As one of the ways the Kami of the world beyond govern the living world, a dispatchment of a capable person is given to each planet. The objective of this is the observation and protection of the intelligent life forms that live on the planet. And the most essential objective is to stimulate the evolutionary growth of immature intelligent life forms, meaning to show them the best path. However, the beings who are dispatched to each planet do not become that planet's Kami. They often become a Kami's attendant. As for Kami, it is mandatory to choose an appropriate being from amongst the intelligent life forms on the planet. There appears to be a rule saying that the fate of a life form is up to the life form itself. Dispatched beings are only permitted an assisting role to the very end. Actually, Mr. Popo and Korin, who would dispatch from the world beyond, are committed to a role supporting the elected Kami. So in a way, they're sort of breaking the rule because Kami didn't come from Earth. Like, he came from Namek and then split apart and stuff, so it's a little bit weird in that sense. But it is then Mr. Popo's task to find a new Guardian if a previous Guardian is unable to find a suitable replacement themselves. So if Kami were to disappear because Piccolo goes, then it's up to Popo. Korin is the one that is a divine interpreter, and is supposed to convey Kami's intention to humans and give them support directly. Which might explain why Korin can be found halfway towards the lookout and be the highest point capable of being reached by climbing by those intrepid mortals without assistance from the power pole. His tower is the highest easily accessible point unaided, so therefore, no mortals have seen Kami really before Goku showed up. As for different planets, we aren't really sure whether the same exact protocol happens. We've never seen an example of that occurring. One big problem in this conundrum is Guru, as he technically performs a similar role to Kami on Earth, but doesn't have a sort of religious following around him, nor does he live in the skies. He lives in a tower on the ground, up a big mountain, which is readily accessible, and all of the remaining Namekians regard him as a fatherly figure, rather than a deity. For the Namekians, Guru is the one who created them. All faith is directed towards the Grand Elder, who then produced Porunga, the god of dreams. However, that is not the kind of thing you could call belief in the form of a deity. It is closer to honor and affection for a parent. We can't say for sure if this is a similar position, or something of an equivalent, due to the fact that both Guru and Kami are Namekian. That being said, in some of the anime filler there is even a story about planet Vegeta having a guardian. It's not been alluded to since, but nevertheless, it is pretty intriguing to think of what a guardian of the Saiyans would have been about outside of filler. But what we do know is that King Kai told Goku that story as some kind of fairy tale, that this guy, who we nowadays might consider to be a facsimile of Yamoshi, destroyed his homeworld via a meteor storm after realizing how evil the Saiyans were, and that there was no hope for redemption. Now supposedly this story was fabricated by King Kai himself, so as to discourage Goku from ever seeking out Frieza and putting himself and his friends in jeopardy. I mean, look how that turned out. But it's pretty interesting in a later context, when we factor in Beerus ordering Frieza to destroy Planet Vegeta. Even though the original tidbit is only filler, it might just be a coincidence, but it's an interesting coincidence nevertheless. The movies also have their own sense to throw into the mix in the form of Kanatsian wizards, who were the mentors of Tapion from the 13th movie, but their guardian titles are likely not the same as Earth's guardian, which, just makes things all the more confusing in the pursuit of trying to make sense of what Kami actually does. Then we got the Kami of the galaxy from Dr. Slump. Yeah, it goes back to the series Toriyama was working on before Dragon Ball. A lot of things in fact harken back to Dr. Slump that are in Dragon Ball when you think about it. This Kami wanted to thwart development of human civilization to keep them, sort of primitive and pure in a way. A much more simple civilization which could easily be handled so as to most likely avoid lots of hard work on their part. He also looks suspiciously like Master Roshi. So the question we have right now would be this. Is Earth special? Or do other planets have or had guardians before Earth? No, we don't mean those few filler examples that we've told you, but rather a proper Kami-like figure, which is practically identical to ours. Well, one may say that the presence of Kami might be what saved the Earth of Universe 7 from suffering the fate of Universe 6's Earth. Remember how Champa and Vados mentioned that their Earth had long since departed and had basically yeeted itself out of existence? Yeah, it's a long shot, but it's a plausible explanation that Kami being there was enough to save the world. But on the other hand, due to the fact of how limited Kami's intervention has proven to be in Universe 7, we sadly cannot rule out the possibility that Kami's Universe 6 counterpart just allowed the war and conflict on Earth to happen. Perhaps they deemed it inevitable, like with the supposed planet Vegeta Guardian to what his people were doing. Like he deemed them a lost cause and therefore they deserved everything that was coming to them. After all, the no-intervention politics of Kais and angels seems to mirror the restrictions that Kami deals with on a daily basis. Knowing what kind of a person King Kai is, it's not hard to imagine perhaps that maybe Kami's position was created due to King Kai's laziness. Possible delegation? Passing the buck? Perhaps. Maybe Earth had been so eventful up until present day that King Kai had had enough of dealing with it firsthand. This feels very Toriyama in logic, but maybe our pun master just decided one day to shove part of his job onto somebody else, to have a fly on the wall as it were. Although King Kai can be pretty helpful, he is strangely absent in many situations where you would think he would be vital, especially in the Future Trunks timeline. Where was he? So it can be assumed that he is a little bit lethargic when it comes to his duties sometimes. Still better than Shin though. At the end of the day, we seem to know the ins and outs more of the angels, Kais, and gods that we've gotten to know recently than something that we've known for a long time, something as close to us like Kami. We know very little about his predecessors, and while we are familiar with his personal backstory, the rank that he holds is still a mystery to this day, really. Maybe that's the point? To keep it ambiguous so we can just fill in the blanks ourselves? Or maybe it was just Toriyama making stuff up and not bothering about fully explaining the new stuff with the old. Yeah, that reason seems a bit more believable, doesn't it? But still, hopefully one day, we may actually see one of the Kamis of the past show up, not as ambiguous filler clouds of smoke, but as an actual person. I think it would be pretty cool. But what do you guys think? Would you like to know more about what Kami does, or do you think that we're past that and we should really just focus on the higher-ups more? Leave a comment below and let's get this discussion going. And I shall see you in the next video. Catch you later!